Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of American Rambler. I'm your host, Colin Woodward, and I hope you are having a very happy 2016. Yes, another new year, and when I think back of stuff, I'm sure a lot of you are like this, that happened last year. It doesn't seem very long ago when I'm thinking back last year, the Super Bowl. I know that's usually played in late January, sometimes early February, so it hasn't been quite a year since the last Super Bowl. But anyway, it doesn't feel all that long ago. And, here we are again, another new year. Hope you have recovered from all the holiday stuff, the travel, which can be the roughest part of the holidays for a lot of us, especially if you have to fly. I didn't fly this year, thankfully, but did have to make a long drive in December, which really wasn't that bad. It was before Christmas, and I don't think it would have mattered much in terms of traffic, but did have to go about 8 hours up to Massachusetts and then back. And again, it's not that bad of a drive if you've done drives longer than that, which I have, but thankfully don't have to do that too often. Really what's been getting me lately is the drive to Richmond and back to Colonial Beach, where I am. That's about an hour and 15 minutes on a good day. Sometimes it takes longer, especially if you have to stop and stuff. But one good thing I did see when we were on our way to Richmond, saw gas for $1.59. I realize that's probably a bit unusual for most parts of the country right now, and even in Virginia, I haven't seen it that cheap anywhere but the place where I-95 meets Route 1. That's where I saw it for $1.59. There's a lot of trucks going in and out of there. It's kind of in the part where, you take 301 and then you get on Route 1 and head into Richmond anyway. No one cares about that. It's not from around here. But the gas was cheap, and hopefully it's a sign of things to come. I realize it can't get that low before it starts getting expensive again. But for now, we will enjoy it. I think mostly it's going for about $1.80 or $1.70 in Virginia, or at least in the northern neck. I didn't think it was all that much more expensive when we were up in the Northeast in December, but I know it varies from state to state. I was a bit surprised when we were living in Little Rock that the gas prices weren't necessarily all that cheap there, but they've been pretty cheap since I've moved to Virginia in the late summer. So that has been nice. I know, a lot of us are living paycheck to paycheck and always thinking about money and all that. One good thing, even if you didn't get a raise this year, is the price of gas has been pretty cheap. Hope you got a Christmas bonus no matter where you work. I did. I was lucky. I got a little Christmas bonus, and that was nice. And got a nice holiday party that my employer, Stratford Hall, threw for us. So that was good. What else has been going on? Well, didn't do anything too exciting for New Year's Eve, though. I never do. I may have said in an earlier podcast that New Year's Eve, I think, is one of those one of those holidays where you just don't party as much as people think you should, or the Hollywood movies say you should. I can't remember too many New Year's Eves where I've gone out at all, let alone gone to a party like you would see in When Harry Met Sally or something. But it's always nice to have the time off. The wife and I stayed home. We had some drinks and we watched a movie, which I think everyone watches around the holidays, which was Clockwork Orange. A movie that I have not seen in a long time. I don't know how many times I've seen it. It was maybe the third time for me. I haven't seen it that many times. It's a pretty disturbing movie, pretty creepy. I think I saw it for the first time when I was in college. But we were watching Clockwork Orange because my wife had said that it was one of the movies that Netflix is taking out of the rotation, which was kind of surprising to me because Clockwork Orange is such a classic movie. I mean, you can think what you want about it, but it's certainly, if not an important film, a very well thought out film and an inventive film in a lot of ways. And of course, based on the book by Anthony Burgess. And I never read the book, but from what I know, the movie did diverge from the book in some ways, and probably most importantly in the ending, which I guess Anthony Burgess wasn't too happy with because he thought the ending was too Nixonian, whereas his ending to the book was, as he put it, Kennedy-esque. I guess he sort of left some room for hope and optimism at the end of his book, whereas the movie, it's not like that at all. I don't want to give anything away if you've never seen it, but it's about this thug in London, or somewhere in England. I'm not sure if they ever specify it's London, but it's sort of this dystopian society, and he stays out all night committing crimes and beating up people and raping and breaking into houses and all these horrible things. And he's eventually sent to prison, and he is, quote-unquote, reformed through a form of, I guess you call it, well, I don't know what the psychological term is, but they condition him against violence by making him watch violent movies against his will while putting these eye drops into his eyes, and it eventually, makes him become a good person. But it doesn't end up sticking, because when he gets out of prison, he realizes that all the people that he had wronged in his life are out to get him and want to do horrible things to him. And because of his conditioning, he's not able to fight back. And especially when he hears Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, he just goes crazy and tries to kill himself at the end of the movie. And this all doesn't sound very upbeat, and it certainly isn't an upbeat movie. It is a disturbing movie, but it is directed by Stanley Kubrick, and it is a classic in a lot of ways. If you like Kubrick, it's certainly a movie you should see, or even if you don't, it's just kind of one of those movies that people talk about, especially I think when you're in college. Clockwork Orange kind of has this cachet, the same way that Rocky Horror Picture Show does, I think, and some other movies that are out there. And there are a lot of similarities, actually, between A Clockwork Orange and Rocky Horror Picture Show. Now, Rocky Horror Picture Show is a musical, and it's much more lighthearted, but it is pretty strange and grotesque in a lot of ways, and does have that 70s darkness about it. And people are in costume in Rocky Horror the same way they are in Clockwork Orange, at least for a lot of it. The main character, Alex, in Clockwork Orange kind of has this outfit that he wears when he goes out at night, and when he comes back from his night of debauchery and raping and pillaging, he takes off the costume, and in the morning he's a quote-unquote normal looking guy. And it's amazing to think that movie is probably about more than 40 years old now. It still holds up pretty well, I think, partly because it's set in this dystopian landscape, so it ages fairly well. I mean, there are kind of some 70s haircuts and certainly some things that look very 70s about it. But it is a very interesting movie, and certainly a movie that was made to be analyzed. I think maybe I'm a bit of a frustrated film student or something. But there is a lot to talk about with that kind of a movie and what Kubrick is doing, not just overall, but really scene to scene. And I was telling my wife that, I hadn't seen the movie when I was a freshman in college. I hadn't seen it yet. But at the place I went to college in Connecticut, my roommate went to see screening of the film, which was playing at the movie theater that we had on campus, which is really a great theater. But it was one screen. They would play new movies. They play classic movies. And my roommate went out one night to see A Clockwork Orange, which was playing. And I didn't go see it with him. I'm not sure why. But anyway, he came back and he said, yeah, when I was at the theater, there were people that were dressed up like the characters from the movie with the bowler hats and the white boiler suits and the black boots and everything, which I agreed with him. He thought it was pretty creepy and surprising. I don't think he expected people to be dressed up. But that is something that you do see with the Rocky Horror Picture Show, but not so much with Clockwork Orange. At least I don't think most people who go to a screening of Clockwork Orange would expect that there would be people who were dressed up in this very kind of menacing manner. But I don't know. I've never seen it at the theater, so maybe every time they do show that somewhere, people dress up like Alex and his droogs and are ready for some of the ultra violence. I did go to see Rocky Horror Picture Show at the movies once, and that was a trip. I'd never gone to see it before. I went to the theater that one time, and it was actually a lot of fun. They do sort of haze you a bit if you've never been. You will get a letter V for virgin put on your forehead in red lipstick. And, of course, everyone is dressed up and there to have a big old time and quote all the lines and act it out on stage, and it's really pretty wild. I did that when I was in Baton Rouge when I was in grad school, and I had no idea what to expect. I was expecting this kind of silly musical, and it is that, and it's a pretty bad movie. I can't imagine watching it with no audience there to make fun of it, but with the audience participation, it is actually a lot of fun. So anyway, going on a bit of a tangent there with Rocky Horror Picture Show and Clockwork Orange, but yes, that is how I spent my New Year's Eve, watching about half of Clockwork Orange until it got too late and we had to go to bed. It is a pretty long movie. And I think using Clockwork Orange as a springboard, I'm going to continue talking about movies this time. I keep saying I'm going to do a music show, and I certainly will, but it seems like every time I'm ready to do the podcast, I see something that makes me want to do something different. Sometimes it's something in the news, like with the last podcast talking about Robert E. Lee and the commemoration of him and what's been going on in New Orleans with the statues and everything. Haven't been following that too closely lately. I think there's been some legal wrangling with the removal of those statues, and who knows, it might end up never happening. But their New Orleans City Council did vote to remove the Lee statue and the Jefferson Davis statue and two other statues. But some pro-Confederate and pro-preservationist groups are holding that up. So we'll see about that. That might be subject for another show in terms of following how that's all playing out in New Orleans and some other things that are going on in terms of Civil War memory and preserving history. But what I wanted to talk about today, continuing the movie buff path, continuing down the movie buff path, is I want to talk about Quentin Tarantino. I recently saw the latest movie that he did, The Hateful Eight, and didn't know a whole lot about it going in. I kind of like to go into movies cold usually if I can. I mean, certainly with some movies you know what to expect. They're pretty formulaic, like the James Bond movies and Mission Impossible. As good as those movies can be, they're pretty formulaic. But with Tarantino, not so much. And really, I think he's made a name for himself as someone who has worked against formula and worked against stereotypes in a lot of ways in his movies. And just to say a little bit about The Hateful Eight, It is a Western crossed with a murder mystery. That's the best synopsis I could give of it. It is set sometime after the Civil War. I don't think it's ever said exactly what year it is. My guess is it's probably supposed to be the 1870s at some point. And Django, which was his previous movie, he was very specific about time period, and I think the movie was set 1859, so just about 2 years before the Civil War breaks out. And that was a movie about slavery, so obviously it had to be set before the Civil War, because after the Civil War there were no slaves. But in this movie, The Hateful Eight, he's fuzzier about the time, and I guess because it doesn't really matter all that much. What's important to the movie is that it is after the Civil War, and what the movie does is show you sort of the fallout of the Civil War by giving us these characters who are all pretty unique in their own way, but some of them are still dealing with what they did during the Civil War and the legacy of the war for them. Now, one of the characters is played by Samuel L. Jackson. He's a black bounty hunter, and in a way, he's sort of the continuation of the Django character, who was a bounty hunter in that film. And, obviously, I don't know if there were any black bounty hunters in the Civil War era. Maybe after the war, but I find that kind of doubtful. But maybe there were. I don't know. It's something I've never read up on. But the point with Tarantino is not really to get too hung up on the history. I know people do that, and they mean well, the historians who like to analyze the history of Hollywood movies. I feel like it's kind of a fool's errand. With Django, that was certainly valid because, again, the history was specific to a year, 1859, and talking about what's going on in the country and how slavery was, and there was, I think Django in a lot of ways did actually give a pretty good representation of slavery in some ways. I mean, you could read a lot of books about slavery, but never really get a sense of what it was actually like or what it looked like, and just something about seeing it on the screen, I think, does something that a book can't. A movie can really put you in that time period, and if the movie's done well enough, the houses will look right, and the way people are dressed will look right. I mean, the brutality of the Django movie was certainly one aspect of slavery that didn't happen everywhere, and he is using a lot of extreme examples of what happened during slavery. And I mean, this is not to say the end of the movie is pretty preposterous and it's a bloody shootout and everything, but the scenes that do deal with slavery are certainly compelling and interesting, and in a lot of ways gives you just as good a sense of slavery as the movie 12 Years a Slave did. Now, again, they're two very different movies with two very different agendas, I guess you could say. Tarantino's more about trying to entertain, and 12 Years a Slave is more about telling the story, which is based on a slave memoir. So it's firmly based in the historical record, whereas Django's more this sort of diseased product of Tarantino's imagination, which is impressive, but is also, I think, a lot of it just coming out of what he's seen in movies and maybe a little bit what he's read about slavery. I don't know how serious a historian he is, but Tarantino's movie, that's not really the point. It's more about the story and the characters and the dialogue and the action and everything. And in 12 Years a Slave, it's there is no vengeful shootout at the end between a former slave and his oppressors at the mansion where he was a slave. And so the Hateful Eight is kind of a continuation of Django. Again, the Samuel L. Jackson characters, it's almost like a sequel, really, to Django Unchained. And the Samuel L. Jackson character is like an older version of the Jamie Foxx character from Django. And anyway, to kind of set the stage, you have there's this, well, it's not a house, it's actually a general store. They call it, I think it was called Minnie's Haberdashery in the movie, but it's a general store set in Wyoming. And there's a blizzard, and all these characters end up at the general store. And the main character, that is played by Kurt Russell, is trying to bring this woman into a town that's near where the general store is. And he's a bounty hunter, she's a criminal, and he's bringing this woman into town to have her hanged. And there's a $10,000 price on her head. And the problem is there's this blizzard that's coming through. Kurt Russell can't make it to town in quick enough time to avoid the blizzard. So he's going to stay for a couple days in this general store. And Samuel L. Jackson, he picks up along the way. When he gets to the general store, these kind of ornery characters there. And what happens is that no one's really sure who they can trust and what their motives are for being at this certain place and time. And to talk about the plot too much would be to give stuff away. But it is a very good movie in the sense that it builds the tension over time. It's a pretty long movie. I think it's about 2 hours, 45 minutes. And not a whole lot of action for the first hour and a half or so. But once the bloodletting begins, it gets pretty crazy, and is just as bloody as any of Tarantino's other movies. If not in quantity, certainly in quality. And what I thought was interesting was that it really was, in a lot of ways, a remake of Reservoir Dogs, which was Tarantino's first movie. I didn't know a whole lot about Reservoir Dogs when it first came out. I think it was 92 it came out, so I was just about in college, or maybe not quite yet. And when I did get into college as a freshman, kept hearing about this movie Reservoir Dogs, and I don't know if I knew who Tarantino was, but everyone was saying how good a movie Reservoir Dogs was. It was kind of this indie movie, not a very high budget, but I heard about, it was, the acting was good and it was very violent, and that this guy Tarantino was doing something different. And it took me about a year or so before I actually saw the movie. I think I saw it on VHS, and then I think it played at my college movie theater again. This is the same one that my roommate saw Clockwork Orange at. And so I was able to see it on the big screen. And, it was a very violent movie, but it was impressive in terms of the dialogue and also what Tarantino was able to do on a pretty limited budget. And if you look at Reservoir Dogs now, it pretty much plays like a play. It's essentially and takes place in one room. There are some flashbacks and there's some exterior shots, but I'd say, most of the movie just is in this one room where the characters are talking to each other and eventually shooting at each other. And it's a very bloody movie. There's loads of swearing and just shouting at each other. It's a very guy kind of movie. And that's really where Tarantino was coming from with that movie, and to a large degree the movies that have come after. His influences are those movies from the 60s and 70s, the Lee Marvin movies, the spaghetti westerns of Clint Eastwood, and Tarantino knows a lot about movies, probably more than just about anybody alive. He's seen a lot of foreign movies and obscure types of things. He actually has his own movie theater in LA, which I think is really cool. He plays these obscure movies going back to the silent era. But with Reservoir Dogs, it is in that tradition of Dirty Harry and the Lee Marvin movies, and in later films that comes out even more and more. But the first movie, I think, was part of that wave of the indie films of the 1990s, and I don't really know a lot about how that all started and who was backing these movies. But it seemed like it was a time when guys who were relatively unknown, if they had some talent and they had a little bit of money, could do something really important or very interesting. And Tarantino was this guy who worked at a video store, had not gone to film school the way Spike Lee had or Martin Scorsese had, but he loved movies and he wrote a good script. And he got Reservoir Dogs made, and I think, had it been a little harder on him, he probably would have shot it in his garage and would have tried to get it sold that way. Reservoir Dogs was kind of this cult movie until Pulp Fiction came out, which sort of bridged the gap between cult movies and mainstream movies. And I mean, certainly, in no way is Pulp Fiction a mainstream movie. I mean, it had a lot of success, but it's just such a weird film, and is not as violent as Reservoir Dogs in some ways. In some ways, is a lot worse. But it definitely took a different track than Reservoir Dogs did. Tarantino was continuing the theme of gangster life in L.A., but Pulp Fiction, it goes a different direction in the sense that you have these three different stories that are kind of bridged, but you have essentially three 50-minute movies in one movie. The first one with the gold watch and Bruce Willis. That's the second one. The first one was with John Travolta, and he has a really horrible night on this. Well, he goes on this date with the wife of his boss, who is the big gangster, and that starts to unravel when the boss's wife ODs, and Travolta has to deal with all that. So that's kind of the first one, and then Bruce Willis does the second one about the gold watch, and then the third one is really Samuel L. Jackson's part when they're in the diner and the two robbers rob the diner, and they don't know that Samuel L. Jackson is there with his gun, and Travolta's there with his gun, and Samuel L. Jackson gives a really great soliloquy at the end about the path of the righteous man that really ends the film very well. And initially that was not in the script. Tarantino wrote a later draft that had that Jackson soliloquy in it, which, if you listen to that part of Pulp Fiction, in ways it kind of sums up maybe Tarantino's whole career about the tyranny of evil men. And I was thinking about that when I was watching The Hateful Eight, that it's really a movie where you're seeing the tyranny of evil men played out in various ways. It's called The Hateful Eight because all the 8 guys in the movie kind of have it coming. Well, they're not all guys. There is one woman. But they all kind of have it coming. There really are no good guys. And people have talked in the past about Tarantino's morality or lack thereof, that he sort of believes that it's absurd to think in terms of good and evil in movies, that the good guys are kind of bad and bad guys are kind of good, and it's sort of a Hobbesian world out there where we're all just up against it and trying to survive. But Pulp Fiction was really a mind-blowing movie because he's just doing so many different things in that movie with the flashbacks, which I hadn't seen that done quite that well since maybe Citizen Kane. And Tarantino did such a good job of that movie that it unfortunately inspired a bunch of imitators. And if you remember the mid-90s, it seemed everyone was trying to do Pulp Fiction for a couple of years. And, some of them were okay, some of them were not so good. Actually, I think Big Lebowski was trying to live up to the standard of Pulp Fiction, and I've never been a huge fan of The Big Lebowski, and a lot of people love it. And Jeff Bridges is great in that movie, but it's sort of the Coen brothers doing Tarantino, and if they did it like the Coen brothers, that's okay. And again, some people love that movie, and more power to them for liking it, and the Coen brothers for making it. But I always kind of felt like The Big Lebowski was a Pulp Fiction with its tongue a little too in cheek. And so some good things about Big Lebowski, but I think Pulp Fiction is a far superior movie. I think if you wanted to look at crime movies for the Coen brothers, you should look to Blood Simple and No Country for Old Men. But Pulp Fiction was such a huge success for Tarantino that it would have been hard for him to follow it up with anything as good. And when Jackie Brown came out, didn't get around to seeing it at the theater. I'm not sure why, but I think when I heard that it was based on an Elmore Leonard novel and that Tarantino had not come up with the story himself, I was kind of disappointed in that, because I expected Tarantino to just come up with another movie from scratch. And Jackie Brown is okay. I think I've seen it a couple times. The first time I was pretty disappointed. Second time I was like, okay, don't expect Pulp Fiction. Just try to take the movie on its own terms. And I don't know. I just think there's too much talking and there's not enough action, and I'm still confused by the ending. I've seen it twice, and I don't think I still get what's going on at the end. But anyway, maybe Tarantino sort of felt his creative juices drying up a little bit after Jackie Brown, because after that he took a few years off. I think it was about 7 years. Not sure exactly when Jackie Brown came out, maybe 96, 97. And the next bona fide Tarantino movie didn't come out until Kill Bill. Now, between Jackie Brown and Kill Bill, like I said, there were a lot of Pulp Fiction imitators. Tarantino was trying his hand in some other things. He was the executive producer in some movies. He seemed like he wanted to become more of an actor, and he's not a great actor, but he did appear in a few films and was trying to help some other directors out. I know he was a big help to Robert Rodriguez, who did the El Mariachi movie and the other ones that followed. So he was helping out guys that were like him, that had come from a kind of humble background and didn't have a lot of money, but were making good-looking movies and had something interesting to say, or at least knew how to direct an action film. And so for a number of years there, Tarantino didn't seem to be doing much. At least he wasn't making original movies the way he had early in his career. And for the rest of us, life goes on. We watch movies regardless of who's making them, and there was still that tide of the indie movies going into the early 2000s, Things like uh, Eternal Sunshine, The Spotless Mind, and all those kind of movies that were doing something different, that were not big Hollywood movies. Spike Jonze was one of those kind of guys, and being John Malkovich is a pretty out there movie. So in the early 2000s, you're still seeing these strange indie movies coming out, but Tarantino seemed to be pretty quiet for a while. But when I was a graduate, again, I was in grad school for a long time. But around, I think it was 2003, Kill Bill comes out, and that movie just really blew me away. At the time, it was one of the best action movies I think I've ever seen. I thought that the anime sequence early in the film was brilliant, and just the last scene with the showdown at the House of Blue Leaves was just an amazing sequence with the swords and the I don't know what it is, karate, if you want to call it that. It was just an amazing action movie that was kind of surprising coming from Tarantino, because his movies had some good action, but he'd mostly been a dialogue guy for the longest time. I mean, Pulp Fiction, people quote the dialogue from it, the going medieval on someone's ass, and the Royale with cheese, and all those great lines from that movie. But Kill Bill, he's doing something very different. Story about a woman, and that's really, well, Jackie Brown was a story about a woman too, but the bride in Kill Bill is total woman of action. She had been a former assassin, and she wanted to get back at all the killers in her group that had double-crossed her and tried to kill her. And again, I mean, the movie's loaded with violence. It's almost unbelievable, the level of violence in that movie. But it gets to a point where it just gets absurd. And I think Tarantino obviously knew that, with heads getting sliced off and arms and legs and everything. It's just it's a complete melee at the end, and I mean, it goes beyond any any realistic boundary. And again, Tarantino's drawing on all those weird movies that he's seen, the B movies, the kung fu movies, and the grindhouse pictures that he had seen when he was younger, before he became a filmmaker. And I guess he still does watch a lot of those low budget movies that were a little bit before my time. I don't think, but when I was watching movies in the early 80s, you could see these strange movies that he was watching. Maybe you could in L.A. or some of the bigger cities, but not in middle America or small town America. But Tarantino is able to kind of put that all in the pot for Kill Bill, and from it's interesting, the whole idea of what's original and what's derivative. And sometimes I don't really think there is much of a difference, if that makes sense. I think if something gets to the point where it's so derivative, that's a bad thing. But sometimes if you can take, because anything that's original, it's derived from something. And you can look at a film like Kill Bill and say, oh, well, that's the suit that Bruce Lee wore in his movie, and Tarantino's using it here. The bride's wearing the yellow suit that Bruce Lee wore in that one movie. And, this is another scene. This is like a scene from another movie, and blah, blah, blah. It's like, and there certainly is some of that in that movie, and Tarantino's, his films in general. I think in the movie Django, there's a Mandingo fighting scene, and obviously Tarantino is drawing on that movie Mandingo. There is no real historical basis to slaves fighting each other to the death for the amusement of their masters, but Tarantino's thinking of a movie that he saw, and he wanted to put that in the movie about slavery. And so sometimes he's his references are a bit direct. But even if he is sometimes paying homage, if you want to put it nicely, you could say ripping things off or plagiarizing. He's also a director that's capable of true originality. And I don't throw this word around, but I would say Tarantino is truly a genius, a cinematic genius. I think in terms of his impact on his generation of filmmakers, it's tricky with him because you don't want to direct a movie like him, because then everyone will know you're ripping off Tarantino and it's a Pulp Fiction knockoff, the way there were so many in the late 90s. But I think so many people admire him, and what he does is that they're a bit afraid to even think about ripping him off, especially now. I mean, he's sort of off in his own world, and that he decided to go back in time in terms of subject matter. He's making movies that are set in the Wild West now. Is pretty far removed from Reservoir Dogs, at least in terms of setting. Now, I think in terms of the themes of the film and the plot, he is in Hateful Eight drawing on Reservoir Dogs in a lot of ways. But I'll get to that in a minute and just say a little bit more about Kill Bill. That I was just amazed when the first one came out. Now the second one, wasn't so impressed by it. There are some great scenes in that. The fight scene in the trailer is good. The part where Bud tries to bury the bride and leave her to die in the coffin, buried alive, is a cool scene. But on the whole, I thought there was way too much talking. I thought the ending was anticlimactic and very different from Kill Bill, the first one, and I was disappointed in that. I wanted more of the action and this sense of drive, but I didn't feel like the second movie really had that. It kind of has this long geek talk at the end about Superman and being a superhero, and it's a pretty long movie, and at that point I was kind of sick of it. So unfortunately, I didn't think the second Kill Bill movie was as nearly as good as the first, and I guess Tarantino considers the two Kill Bills as one movie, because when Hateful Eight came out, it is oddly enough his eighth movie, or at least that's what he considers his eighth movie. If you split Kill Bill into two parts, as it was, I mean, they had the one movie that was released and the year later the other one. He considers that all his fourth movie. And I think he filmed it all at once and then kind of split it up. But, again, a lot of people liked the second Kill Bill as much, if not more, than the first one, because it does get deeper into the characters. And, is certainly an original story in a lot of ways. But for me, it just didn't do it. I liked the action of the first movie, and the violence is certainly there in the second one, but it just isn't. I think Kill Bill just kept the intensity level up so high by the second movie. I just felt kind of let down. But anyway, Tarantino, that after Kill Bill got into this project where he wanted to make this Grindhouse movie, which, if you saw it at the theater, was a pretty long ordeal. It was 2 movies, a movie directed by Robert Rodriguez, and then Tarantino directed the second one. The first one was, what was it? I can't remember the first one. It was Planet World? No, that doesn't sound right. Planet Terror, I think it was. Anyway, so there was one movie directed by Robert Rodriguez, Planet World, and there was another one directed by Tarantino called Death Proof. And what I thought was interesting about Grindhouse was that I actually thought the Rodriguez movie was more Tarantino than the Tarantino movie that followed, because it incorporated a lot of those Tarantino-ish elements. I mean, the violence is certainly there, and actually some of the characters from Kill Bill were in it. I know the sheriff and his son, or whatever they were supposed to be, deputies. They made a cameo, and the Tarantino movie was the second half of the bill, and it wasn't a very long movie. And as far as Tarantino goes, it was pretty slight. Death Proof. I mean, I know Tarantino was paying homage to those Grindhouse movies that were not really supposed to be that great and didn't have great production values. And there's nothing wrong with the production values of Death Proof, but he's paying homage to those weird B movies that he had seen. And the movie's about Kurt Russell plays this guy who has some crazy car that he drives, and he has like a cage in the driver's side or something that protects him, so when he crashes the car with people in it, the people die. And this is how he works as a serial killer, or whatever he's supposed to be. And again, it didn't really work for me, because I just thought there was too much talking. There's one scene in a diner where Tarantino does this typical circle the table while people are talking, like he had done Reservoir Dogs, and I just didn't think the dialogue was very good in that movie, in that scene in particular. But it was interesting because Kurt Russell was in it, and he's kind of one of those actors that you wouldn't really think Tarantino would want to put in one of his movies, but I'm sure he's probably been a longtime fan of Kurt Russell and seen the Escape from New York movies and other things that Kurt Russell's done. And Kurt Russell's really been around for a while. I don't know how old he is now. He's got to be in his mid-60s, I would say. He was good in Hateful Eight, and they made him up to look especially older, but he did carry himself pretty well. He can still carry himself as an action guy, as a tough guy. But I didn't think Death Proof was very good. The ending with the chase scene was really good and almost redeemed the whole movie. But on the whole, I was pretty disappointed. Tarantino seems to like this actress named Zoe Bell, who was in Death Proof. She was the main character, and I think she's actually a stunt woman from either Australia or New Zealand, maybe New Zealand, because in Hateful Eight she has a cameo. She kind of bounces around and actually says she's from New Zealand. Now, what a blonde woman from New Zealand would be doing in a general store in Wyoming in the 1870s is anybody's guess, but apparently Tarantino likes her, and she's very cute, and she has a lot of energy, and in the scene it's almost distracting, the amount of energy. She really just bounces around and can barely sit still, and she's very cute and all, but I thought that was one of the less effective scenes in the movie. But Tarantino likes her, and he has something for blondes, definitely. What with Kill Bill and The Bride, and some other movies, he's had these blonde women characters. Well, he's had brunettes too, but anyway, don't know much about Tarantino's love life, and maybe I really don't want to know very much. But Death Proof was a real disappointment, and when I saw it, actually, someone walked out on it. It was this kid. He looked like he was in his teens, and he just started bounding down the aisle and said, "This movie sucks," and walked out. And at that point, I could sympathize with him, because we were probably about 3 hours in at that point in the Grindhouse experience, and he was right. Death Proof wasn't very good. I wouldn't say it sucked. That's unfair. It's not that bad, but certainly it's lesser Tarantino. And I don't think the Grindhouse project made any money for Tarantino, and it turned out to be one of those double album type things where sometimes musicians will make enough music for a double album or even a triple album, and their record company will not release it as a double album or a triple album, so they'll split it up into 2 or 3 albums to make more money. Unless you're the Beatles, you can do anything you want. You can do a double album, triple album. People will buy it. But Death Proof is part of the longer Grindhouse movie that, like I said, is over 3 hours or whatever it was. And when it came out on DVD, they decided to split it into 2 movies, which, of course, was antithetical to what Tarantino and Rodriguez were doing. And as artists, I could respect them wanting to have it as it was intended in one very long movie, but the powers that be, that are smoking cigars behind closed doors and scheming and wanting to make money in Hollywood, understandably so, split the movie up, and I guess probably there's a full version out there somewhere. I don't know. I never got the movie on DVD because I didn't think it was worth buying, but even the best of us sometimes don't get our way, and I think Tarantino had certainly, I hesitate to use this term because people have said this against me and it's hurt my feelings in the past, but self-indulgent would be a way to describe the Grindhouse Project. And I think maybe Tarantino learned a lesson from that, because his next movie was much more focused, although still had some issues with length and dialogue. But his next movie, Inglourious Bastards, was a departure for him because it was the first movie he'd done that was set back in time and set during World War II. And I had heard before it came out that it was going to be something like The Dirty Dozen. And it really wasn't. It had a little bit of that plot in terms of getting together this group of roughneck World War II soldiers who go on a special mission into the heart of Germany. Well, I guess it was France, and I can't remember. But they go behind the German lines because the Germans had occupied pretty much all of Western Europe, and I guess it was France. They go in there and they have this mission to kill Hitler, and the movie is historical up to a point. If you've seen it, the ending, of course, departs completely from the historic record, and anyone that knows anything about history will know it's counter historical. It's counterfactual, and I won't give away the ending, but Tarantino rewriting the last year or so of World War II. And the movie really had its moments. I mean, the ending is pretty spectacular. Again, an orgy of violence and the Tarantino fashion. And really, what makes Inglourious Bastards good is Christoph Waltz. It's the first movie with him, and he just steals the movie. He plays this Nazi officer who is cruel and horrible, as we expect from Nazis in movies, but he's different in the sense that he's more about self-interest and his own survival, rather than remaining loyal to the Nazi state and Hitler, which is usually what you see in other World War II movies, from Schindler's List on down. You see the hardcore Nazis, the SS guys who are utterly loyal to Hitler, and Christoph Waltz in that movie is not like that. He's very impish and just brilliant in that, and got a well-deserved Oscar. So it was no surprise that Tarantino wanted to use him again, and Django, playing a much more sympathetic character. He is a bounty hunter, and so he's a violent guy in that, but the guys that he shoots in the movie pretty much have it coming. But he takes Django, the Jamie Foxx slave character, under his wing, and they go around the South, rounding up bad guys, and until they decide to try to free Jamie Foxx's love interest, who's a slave on a plantation owned by Leonardo DiCaprio. And can we just say how I don't know if he's underappreciated, but I think Leonardo DiCaprio is probably one of the best actors working right now. I'd say he's definitely in the top handful of actors, certainly big name actors. I mean, I just think he's great, and even if some of his movies are better than others, I mean, it's true for every actor. But he's really worth watching almost always, from The Departed to Titanic, and he's great in Django as the slave master. I mean, he does kind of do some borderline scene chewing in that movie, but I think everyone does just about. But he's just got so much energy and charisma as an actor. And he's likable even when he's being horrible. So I'll give props to Leonardo, and he was great in Wolf of Wall Street, which is not the best Scorsese movie, but it's entertaining, and he's a fun actor to watch. So for the last three movies, Tarantino has gone back in time, starting with Inglourious Bastards and now working up to the Hateful Eight, and like I said earlier, the Hateful Eight is kind of a combination Western and murder mystery. It's kind of like a game of Clue, except everyone gets shot at the end. I don't think that happened in the Clue movie that came out in the 80s that had Christopher Lloyd and some other folks in it. But it is a very interesting movie, and casting on the whole is pretty good. I mean, sometimes in movies, you can't tell if the casting is just so perfect or the people have created a persona that would kind of shoes them in automatically in a movie, because in Hateful Eight you've got Bruce Dern as cranky old guy, which is a acting market he has certainly cornered, and Samuel L. Jackson as angry black guy, again, a character he's played very well in many movies, and the fact that he has not gotten an Oscar yet is just appalling to me. He should have got one for Pulp Fiction, and I know he's been nominated before, even going back into the 80s. I think he got a nomination for a movie he did with Christopher Reeve. I can't remember the name of that movie, but he's maybe that was someone else. Maybe that was Morgan Freeman. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of. Anyway, Samuel L. Jackson, he's had a great career, and I hope he gets rewarded soon. But Hateful Eight, some of the casting is perfect. Walton Goggins, who is on Justified, I really like him. He kind of starts off as a goofball in Hateful Eight, but he gets a little more sympathetic, and his character gets a little deeper toward the end. Again, we're not really sure what to make of him like the other characters, but things start getting fleshed out, and he's a fun actor to watch too. And he was great on Justified, which unfortunately I thought the show went on a little too long. But him and Timothy Olyphant, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Anyway, they were great on Justified together. And I really hope Walton Goggins is in more movies of this kind. I mean, he was in Django, kind of playing a similar character. He's a bit more of a good guy, I guess you could call him, in Hateful Eight. But I really like him, and as a legit Southerner, he's great to watch in a Western or something set in the South. Jennifer Jason Leigh I thought was great in Hateful Eight. She's kind of funny and is very hateful at times, and you kind of hate her character, but she does have a certain resolve, and she has the only major female role in the film, which is mostly about the guys this time, but really her character is what kind of stirs everything up, because the whole movie is centered around her and what's going to happen to her. And she's another actor that her career has kind of been up and down. I guess she's never really not been working, but I can't remember too many movies I've seen her in recently. I mean, she's been around for as long as I've been watching movies, starting with Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and then going to Single White Female, and now here she is in Hateful Eight, although you wouldn't really even recognize her in Hateful Eight because she's covered with I don't know, dirt and spit and blood for the whole movie. It's just really kind of gross, but she kind of looks like Linda Blair from The Exorcist at times, but is very good. But Hateful Eight is not a perfect movie. I thought some scenes didn't work. I thought Channing Tatum's cameo was kind of distracting. Nothing against Channing Tatum. I think he's a great comedic actor. I'm not so sure about serious roles. He did play the stripper in Magic Mike, and I guess that was kind of a serious movie. But I mean, he's fine. I just thought he was kind of distracting in this, and uh, Tim Roth is in it, and he sort of does a Christoph Waltz impression for a lot of the movie. And I don't know why Christoph Waltz wasn't in it. He would have been perfect, but maybe Tarantino just figured he's bordering on using him too much. And Tim Roth he's a fine actor, but it was such a Christoph Waltz impersonation for a while. But later, his character changes, and again, I don't want to give it away, but there's a reason why he's sort of acting over the top for half of the movie or most of the movie. Because again, it is a game of Clue, and there's a mystery behind all the characters. So just to kind of wrap up, I do think, in a way, 8 movies in, Tarantino is kind of remaking his first movie, Reservoir Dogs. I mean, Hateful Eight's got all the similar characteristics. It's set in one room, pretty much, just like Reservoir Dogs. You've got all these characters who don't know who to believe. In Reservoir Dogs, it was the rat. They had to know who the rat was that talked to the police and blown the whole bank robbery. In Hateful Eight, they just don't. And it's pretty obvious. Some characters are shady, but you don't really know what the truth is, and is there really a gang of thugs waiting in town to destroy everything if Jennifer Jason Leigh's character doesn't make it there. So it's a very interesting movie. Again, Tarantino, he hits a lot of issues. I mean, there is a lot about race you can discuss in this movie. It's not quite as obvious as the Django film, but there is some racial tension in the movie that goes back to the Civil War legacy and all that. And it like Reservoir Dogs, Tarantino's it's amazing what he can do in kind of pretty much one stage. And another thing that I liked about Hateful Eight was its use of sound. I think sound is one of the more underrated aspects of movies a lot of the time. And one of the things I loved about the Star Wars movies when I was a kid was the sound effects, which are great, with the spaceships and the lightsabers and the Darth Vader voice and everything. And in Hateful Eight, again, Tarantino really paces the violence very well, and some of it is very sudden and loud. And there actually was at least one point when I jumped in my seat at the theater. Another endorsement for seeing something at the theater, because when you're at home, there's either distractions or the sound is not going to be what it's like in a theater, and so you're probably not going to jump the way you would. So it's very. I found it very suspenseful, and he does have a great use of sound. Sometimes it is over the top with the shooting, and every time someone gets shot, it sounds like someone dropped a big water balloon from a third-story window onto the pavement. It's pretty over the top, but again, that's just Tarantino being Tarantino, and really since Kill Bill, the violence is become absurd to the point of surreal in his films, and yet he makes it meaningful. It is super violent, and you're expecting it, but just the way he can frame the violence and depict it is always kind of shocking and revolting. He certainly took some cues from horror movie directors, and he does have a friend, Eli Roth, I think is his name, who directed the torture porn there, Hostel, and he actually directed a scene in *Inglourious Basterds*. So he has some friends in the horror movie industry, and so Tarantino knows a lot about that whole genre, and he does kind of weave it into *Hateful Eight*. So it's a weird, again, it's another one of the Tarantino genre bending movies. It's a bit of a comedy. It's Mark Maron has said it's a comedy, and I wouldn't necessarily say that. It's got humor, and in a way it is kind of a comedy. Maron said that the characters are clowns, and they are, again, to a degree, but I see it more of as the murder mystery genre that they're kind of pretending, and it picks up from the whole literary notion of the unreliable narrator, which is kind of a postmodern thing, and Tarantino's certainly a postmodern director, but I kind of almost saw Hateful Eight as a long novel full of unreliable narrators, and everyone's kind of bullshitting, and it's not until the very end that you know who is being truthful. And if a historian had been given that Lincoln letter that Samuel Jackson carries around with him, he would have known that it was a fake letter. The tone is certainly off, and Abraham Lincoln also never signed anything. Abraham Lincoln, everything he signed was always A. Lincoln. The same way that Robert E. Lee never signed anything Robert E. Lee, it was always R. E. Lee. But that's a little historic tidbit, and doesn't affect the movie overall. Again, I wouldn't watch The Hateful Eight from the viewpoint of historical accuracy. It's just Tarantino having fun as always, and I really enjoyed it. So I don't know what he's planning next, but I hope it's full of surprises, the way his movies have been, and the way Hateful Eight is. He's a genius, and I love his movies, and always look forward to it. It might be 4 years from now we see another one, but I'm sure it'll be worth it. I'm sure I'll get our money's worth. All right, well, there we go. Talked about Quentin Tarantino for more than an hour. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I'll be talking to you soon. This next time, I'm just going to go ahead and do it. Going to do the music show. I think it's going to be Johnny Cash, because I'm working on the Johnny Cash book, and I'm still reading a lot about him and following his whole career path. So this has been another episode of American Rambler. I'm your host, Colin Woodward. I am the author of Marching Masters, Slavery, Race, and the Confederate Army During the Civil War. It is available from University of Virginia Press. It's only available in hardcover. Hopefully I'm going to have a paperback coming out, God knows when, maybe a couple of years. But, if Quentin Tarantino wants to option it for a book, I'm certainly willing to do that. I think it's really up his alley. It's a Civil War story full of violence and racial conflict. So I think it would be perfect for him. He hasn't really directed a legit Civil War movie yet. I think that would be great to see. And if he doesn't want to option the book, he could hire me as a consultant. That would be great too. So anyway, Tarantino, if you hear this, please contact me. Okay, folks, thank you very much. I'll be talking to you soon. Take care.